Hey, Mark, did you know my list of top 10 books is better than yours?
Diana, that's the dumbest thing you've ever said. You haven't even seen my list yet.
Ladies and gentlemen, jurists and just curious, welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast. Here you'll learn about marketing, management, and life skills for lawyers that probably won't get you disbarred. Hosted by Marc Whitehead, a seasoned lawyer who remembers when fax machines were cutting edge, and Diana Berry, attorney, COO, and the brains behind the scenes. Together, they are the legal world's most dynamic duo since statutes met regulations. So if you're looking to build a practice, not a prison, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful Barrister, where legal legends are made.
And welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast, the podcast for lawyers about marketing, management, and life skills that probably won't get you disbarred. I'm Marc Whitehead, your host, alongside my co-host, Diana Berry, my COO, my right hand. Hey, Diana, what's up?
Hey, Mark. I'm good. We go to Atticus tomorrow. I'm very excited about today's podcast. I'm a little confused by it, but that's okay.
I am really excited about today's podcast because this is the first podcast we've ever done where I haven't prepared a damn thing, and I don't know what's...
The first?
Trust me. So I will preface it with this. So we just learned that last week was our highest rated podcast ever, and I looked at it like, why was that? And I go, because it was all about marketing, and lawyers love marketing. And
that's not today's podcast. Sorry,
no,
guys.
No, that's the thing is every podcast from now on will have the title marketing in the title, regardless of what we talk about.
Oh.
Just for ratings purposes.
Okay.
Okay. So today we're going to talk strictly about marketing, just Diana's twist on
Diana's twist on marketing from an operations perspective.
From an operational perspective. So no, what are we really talking about today?
Well, it's my top 10 books, but I think I was such a good student. I think I might have missed the assignment, Mark. What are we really supposed to be talking about when we say our top 10 books?
Well, I would say your top 10 most influential books that you feel are worthy of sharing.
Oh, okay. Well, then I didn't miss the assignment, which is very reassuring to my inner nerd.
Right, exactly. Something that people can take, read, and be actionable with. And so the reason I'm excited about this is I don't have to prepare anything.
Well, I'm still excited.
I am simply going to riff off of what you feed me here today. Now, because I can tell you by looking at your stack of books there, I've read a couple of those, but most of them I have not read. So,
well, this is going to be exciting podcast.
I know. So, I feel very free to not have the responsibility of carrying this particular podcast. I don't have to look at notes. I don't have to. I mean, I'm just firing away.
I'm meanwhile getting a little more anxious with every word you said about you riffing. So I will say that I went about my assignment today by my list of just top 10 books plus a bonus that I recommend to people more often than not. And I will go ahead and say we'll do the first three in the first segment because we've already discussed them. So guys, this is my favorite. I was a great student when I was in school. So today is show and tell, and I'm very excited about that. So I've got all the copies of my books. So we have covered 4 disciplines of execution and traction in prior episodes, which are books 1 and 2 on my list. I think 40X was episode 2, and then traction was episode 3.
Right.
And then Fireproof, I was just going to call it book 3.
Mike Morrison, John Knockhazel.
Yes, exactly. Because we haven't done an episode on this particular book, but it is our Atticus required reading for tomorrow.
Yes,
did you do it, Mark?
I did.
You read? Well, perfect. What do you think about Fireproof?
Okay, so the first time I read Fireproof, I read through it and I'm like, this sounds just like Traction. And then I went back and read the introductory notes, which I usually skip for probably poor reasons. And it mentioned that Mike Morse's coach was Gino Wickman, who wrote Traction. So no wonder it sounds just like Traction. It's like Traction for lawyers. So going back and rereading it, which is code for me just scanning through it real quickly because I've already read it. I finished it last night for the second time. So I will go back and say this. He left out, I thought, some key pieces of Traction. So my recommendation, if you're going to read Fireproof, is to read Traction first as your basis of understanding the EOS system, understanding the basic premises of the book. And then I would read Fireproof, because Fireproof is now applying Traction principles to the practice of law. Specifically, I think mostly to the practice of personal injury law, although there's certainly many nuggets that can be used in any practice. But, the main ones are keeping a compelling scoreboard. Your people have to know if they're winning or losing. And so having a visual scoreboard to have your people know whether they're winning or losing in whatever it is their particular task is, I think is one of the key parts of Traction. Is one of the key things that Mike Morris argued in Fireproof, because it gives somebody a daily actionable barometer of what's going on. Am I winning or losing? And everybody wants to be a winner. So interesting, I introduced this concept to one of my coaching clients in Florida, and he put up a big scoreboard in his office for his paralegals. Now, they're a billable firm, and he was complaining that his paralegals were not billing enough. And once he made a public scoreboard where everybody wrote it down, and there was a running chart for the week, nobody wanted to be bottom on that chart, and he said billable skyrocketed.
Oh, wow.
He was so pleased with it. So I think that's kind of the one thing I would draw out of that. If you combine that with the first one, 4 disciplines of execution, how do you execute on it? It's all about cadence of accountability, and that's part of the Traction Fireproof model, is you have to have that cadence of accountability, that weekly level 10 meeting. So that's what I drew out of those books, just off the top of my head, without knowing that was a book that I had to prepare for. So
unsurprisingly, I would have actually said, read it in the order that I have in my hands. Fireproof, Traction, and then 4 disciplines of execution. So exactly what Marc said. Why I would read it in this way, especially for someone who isn't a student of these concepts, Fireproof is an easy read. It is the easiest read. You could read it at night and not get caught up in it. And
probably read it in about 2 hours.
Exactly. And it's not surface, because it's still very hard concepts, but it's an easy read. Meanwhile, then Traction is what I call a tome. You know what a tome is? It's a very thick,
a dense conceptual book.
Yep. It's Traction. You have to almost pick up and put down every time, and it's one of those I would read at different decades or growth areas of your firm.
So the way I would do it is I would try to read and comprehend 1 chapter
exactly a night. If you can, even, because there's so many times there's like 1 page in there and I just get caught up in thinking about the ramifications of an application to our firm.
Yeah.
And then 40X, I'm just going to go ahead and admit I did not even understand the first time I read it. So 40X we read for what we called book club back then. You remember, right. We would do a quarterly book assignment with our attorneys.
40X means the 4 disciplines of execution.
Yes, sir. Sorry. Episode 2, I believe, of our podcast. And I think this is the book that we had to break down into 2 different quarters, because it is, if Traction is dense, 40X is it's an economics book for an entire semester.
So the basic issue is a lot of people have a million great ideas. And those great ideas, as the director would say, end up on the cutting room floor. They just nothing ever happens with them. Nobody executes on them. And the difference between the average and the wildly successful are people who will actually take those ideas and execute on those ideas.
Yes.
And that's easy to say, hard to do.
Well, I mean, even the concept in 40X of leading versus lagging measures, until I had to teach it and put it into practice in our firm, what's very hard, I mean, it's very simple in concept, right?
So explain a leading versus lagging measure. This is a key concept in that book, which I think was kind of the most important, yet the hardest thing to nail.
And you're putting me on the spot. It's like a pop quiz, Marc.
Oh, yeah, I did. See, this is why it's fun for me.
Oh, my gosh. So the leading measures are the things that are indicative of perhaps a trend, whereas the lagging measure is the result.
Right. So I would say the leading measures are predictive of the future, where the lagging measures are basically telling you what's already happened.
And the important thing is you want to track the leading, especially, well, depending on where you are in the org chart is what I've kind of decided. But you want your team scorecards to be full of leading measures, whereas at our leadership level, we see a bunch of lagging measures. And, there are a few leading there. But for the most part, you want to track leading measures. And I missed that the first time I read 40X. And so it's one of those books, again, that you have to come back to again and again as you teach, as your firm grows and you're, building managers.
Exactly. So the best example, the simple example I can give, and this goes back to marketing because we want to pump up the ratings here. We're talking marketing. What does every lawyer want? They want more cases. Specifically, they want more good cases. So getting good cases, that's the result. That's the lagging measure. The leading measure in that scenario is getting more quality leads in the front door. So it's a real simplistic way of explaining leading versus lagging. You can't get a lot of good cases, which is the lagging measure, unless you get a lot of good leads, which is the leading measure.
Exactly.
That's why we're going to call this a marketing episode. Make sure to put that in the show notes so we can pump the ratings. We're not above embellishment at all.
So the operations person is going to say, there's no point in getting all these great cases if you don't know how to execute on them. So that's why I'm going to say my book list is better than yours.
Okay, fine. And I will concede that your book list is better than mine until I come up with my book list.
I was going to say for the next 30 minutes.
Yeah, for the next 30 minutes.
All right. So then I think we're going to take a break and come back with the rest of my books.
This podcast is sponsored by Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability benefits law firm. Marc Whitehead runs a firm of over 60 dedicated people whose mission is to make a difference in the lives of our injured and disabled clients. Marc represents disabled claimants in Social Security disability, private disability insurance, and veterans disability claims in all 50 states. Marc Whitehead is double board certified in both Social Security disability law and personal injury trial law. Marc has litigated disability cases in over 40 states and counting and can help your clients too. Stop throwing your phone calls away. Call Marc Whitehead at 701-VIP-LEAD. That's 701-VIP-LEAD. Or visit our website at disabilitydenials.com. Referral fees are paid in all jurisdictions where it is permitted. Refer us your disability cases today and know that your clients will be in good hands.
And we're back with books 4 and 5, which I would call are not business books. These are just good quality of life books, and that's why I love them. They're both Tim Ferris books, Tools of Titans, and
they're both huge.
And Tribe of Mentors. Yes, they're very lengthy books, and I love them.
You could drop one of those on somebody's head and kill them. Those are
they're
so
very
big.
light. They're not heavy. They're not dense. They're both, according to these, published in 2017. So we'll start with Tools of Titans. The tagline is Tactics, Routines, and Habits of Billionaires, Icons, and World-Class Performers. Marc, you just told me you got this one on Audible?
Yes, I have this on Audible, all 22 hours of it, which violated my 10-hour limit on books, 10-hour listening limit. But so it's 22 hours, and the book matches it. So here's what I love about Tim Ferris. Tim Ferris has made a ton of money on books that he basically didn't write. He basically just interviews people and does a compilation of the interviews, slaps them in book form, sells it, sells millions of copies and makes millions of dollars. And he didn't even write the damn book. He's just basically writing what other people have told him in interview format. Frickin' brilliant.
Genius.
It is genius. It is genius. I mean, that guy has made so much money for so little work. It's just amazing. But, so given that, so Tools of Titan, I just started it this week. And it sort of follows the healthy, wealthy, and wise format. Mm-hmm. So the first third of the book, he's interviewing a series of individuals on different health theories or concepts or hacks or whatever. Some of them I looked through and are pure hacks, which I thought were just a little bit wacky. Some of them were very respected people like Dr. Peter Attia, who I'm a big fan of Peter Attia. So It's a mix and match, but it's one of those. It's almost like a coffee table book where you can just scroll through it and listen to the parts that you want to listen to, and then skip the, I'm skipping the herbal supplement dude, which I don't really have a lot of faith into, but I listened to the section on Peter Attia, and some other notable people in there that I kind of respect and trust. So you can pick and choose, and he he even says in the intro, feel free to bounce around in the book.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't have to read it start to finish. So I read a few things in the health section, and then I immediately skipped over to the wealth section because, of course, that's what I'm always thinking about is the jack. Where's the dollar? Where's the dough? So I've started listening to some of the sections on the in the wealth section, and then I'll probably skip over next week on my insanely long commute in the morning to the wise section just to get a few bits of wisdom. But that's what I kind of like about it. I don't think the book was ever meant to be read start to finish.
Exactly.
It's just go through it and pick out the parts that really resonate with you. He's literally got hundreds of people that he's interviewed in this book, so there's going to be people in there
Exactly. And so I think that that's the book. So that's what I would say is that it's not meant to be a chapter style, like consecutive fashion type book. It's one of those things that I would highly recommend if you are a bedtime reader, keep it and just read maybe a chapter a night or something, or skip around as you do and figure out which ones you've read, because it literally is some greats. And it's like shortcuts to how they became successful. And so, like, for example, one of the things that my takeaway was that a lot of the people he interviewed used what's called a chili pad device for cooling at bedtime.
Yes, and I very much agree. I need to have a ice cold bedroom to sleep well at night.
So I went back in preparation for this episode and looked at my Amazon history. I bought both of these books in 2018, and I will say, perhaps embarrassingly, that I didn't realize how important, because I am always cold. I thought that I needed to be warm at night to sleep well. I never realized how important temperature was to a good night's sleep. So really like that. And then in looking through the things that I highlighted and starred in preparation for this podcast, Peter's Laws, Peter Diamandis. I don't know how to say these names. Regardless, he's excerpted some of his laws that guide his life. He has 28. Law 2, when given a choice, take both, which I think when I was in-house counsel,
I've always said life is an and, not an or.
Exactly. And so when I was in-house, when you were negotiating a contract and someone's like, well, it's either this or that. And I'm like, well, no, now it's definitely not this or that. You're always looking for, if someone gives you two choices, you find a third. And I think that's incumbent as attorneys. That's what we do anyway. If you try to make the pie bigger when you're negotiating to find out the best option for everyone. So highly recommend Tools of Titans and Tribe of Mentors as book 5. So tagline here, shorted life advice from the best in the world. Have you read it, Mark?
I have not read this one. I will say that just from viewing the title, Tribe of Mentors, I'm a big proponent of learning from others, the whole mastermind philosophy. So I can only assume this book sort of goes along those lines.
It does, but in a much more, I'd say, compelling way. So again, unlike you, we're just going to get all of our differences out today. I read the foreword, and I find this one was very interesting. So what he did, and Tim Ferris would be very upset to hear you call him an interviewer, because he doesn't call himself an interviewer. I forget what he calls himself. But in the foreword, he talks about how he had all of this information from all of the people that he interviewed, but he could never condense it into the best of the best of the best. And so that's basically what this book is. And so what he did was he sent out the same 11 or 12 questions to his entire basically database, and in a very specific format. And this is Tools of Titans. So everybody asks, for example, or answers, for example, what book do you give away the most? And so in the foreword, Ferris also talks about how the order of the questions. So, for example, he went with the real easy ones. Everyone knows or can go to their Amazon order list and figure out which book they give away the most. It's not asking, what is your favorite book? Because then people will be like, oh gosh, my favorite book to recommend, my favorite book to give to new college students, my favorite book to read when I want something fun. And if that's your first question that you're asking someone to respond to, they're going to be like, oh, well, that's too hard. But everyone can go to their Amazon list and figure out that it's really easy to do that. And so I learned a lot about how you structure questions. And so it's taught me how to ask a better question, but also sequencing of questions. And then what I thought was really interesting in this book is he also put 3 or 4 of his denials. So learning how to graciously say no, great way to find that in this book. So highly recommend, Mark.
Another brilliant Tim Ferris book that he created that he didn't write.
That's probably also true. And then
this man is brilliant. He's my idol.
Well, I don't know how we can market that, Mark, but back to marketing. But one of I think Willink also makes an appearance later on, but he is also, so it is Tools of Titans, Jocko Willink. You know that name? Uh-huh. Yep. So he is in here, and I found that, again, the thing that I underline the most, what advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? The best way to do that, says Willink, is to outwork them all, which I think's been, characteristic of my life. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. The reason why I can do a pivot table, negotiate your malpractice insurance, run your HR department, all of that is because I was willing to outwork anybody else who said, yeah, that's not part of my job description. And then what Willink says is, in response to the question, when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do? He says, prioritize and execute. Very good advice.
So, all right. So it just reminded me of a story when I was interviewing you for the 6th or 7th time.
Was it only 6 or 7?
When deciding whether to give you the keys to my kingdom, I was calling your references. And, references can be kind of cagey, but I found one and I just kept hammering him. And he goes, what does she do? What is this? And he goes, this, the biggest thing about Diana, she'd do anything. It didn't matter. Whatever had to be done, she would just go do it. And I'm like, okay, I'm down with that. That's cool.
And I think for a lot of our law firm listeners, that's what you're looking for. Make sure you hire someone who's willing to, if your firm is growing, make sure you're not hiring someone so specialized in that position that's not willing to be who's not willing to get outside of that comfort zone. To be like, yeah, I'm going to try and do that, because even though it's not in my true job description.
I will tell this one horror story, and this story of, we had a certain employee who, her original job description said, this is your job description. And then we had the job morphed over time, and we had to expand some duties and take some duties away. And she just said, no, that's not my job description. That's not what I was hired to do. And she wouldn't do it. And ultimately, we got into some legal kerfuffles over that. Now I tell everybody, and I tell them from day one, I said, this is your job description, and the very last piece of your job description is, and anything else that's needed.
Yep, subject to change over time.
Subject to change over time. Mm-hmm. So I always put that in there, nothing is written in stone,
And you want to make sure you hire people who
if your job is to change the paper in the fax machine, you know what? Over time, that just might change, okay?
Yep. No, absolutely, because we don't fax anymore. So moving on to book 6. This was actually a very easy read. Book 6 is the first 90 days. It's written by Michaels Watkins.
Heard of this book, not read it.
I read it after I got this job offer, actually. And I remember applying some of these principles to you when I got here, and I think you were very confused. So I recommend this for any new. I almost made it required reading for our new hire, but I didn't want to give him too much required reading, so I didn't. But give it to, I'd say, anytime you promote from within to, for example, if you're promoting a paralegal to a team leader to a director of operations, or anytime you're hiring into a management level, required reading for, I'd say, you as the owner or the new hire, first 90 days. I'd say that my biggest takeaways from this is you got to listen. When you go in, I think there's this compelling need sometimes to go in and make this big statement or go in and make your mark because, you're the new person. But there's so much about just observing. I think, we just had to read 5 dysfunctions of a team. Did you read it, Mark?
I did.
Mm-hmm. So we read 5 dysfunctions of a team. And in there, the CEO, then the fictional book, I think, and I'm going to quote from Five Dysfunctions, they said that they were even more concerned after Catherine's first 2 weeks on the job. It wasn't that Catherine did anything controversial or misplaced. It was that she did almost nothing at all. And I think that that's the hardest thing for new people to do, is almost just sit there and observe what's happening, but especially for new executives.
So I guess the way you would phrase it is, when you start a new position, especially when you're some manager, like, you need to start off with a listening tour. Take a listening tour of all of your people and just listen to all of them and see where they're coming from, see what their perspective is before you start breaking things.
Exactly. Or trying to, quote unquote, fix things that, you don't know, because you don't know the whole story. You haven't been there long enough to know whether or not it's even broken. So I do think that the book is pretty clear, though, that you should try and secure early wins, which I did like. You just being able to see how you can help. And I think you can only do that after you've secured credibility, because basically, obviously, no one's going to trust you to make a change if they don't think that you're good. So the book says that the best candidates are problems you can tackle quickly with modest expenditures and will yield visible operational and financial gains.
So this again reminds me of the interview process with you, because I kept hammering you with this question over and over, and like, all right, so let's say on day one, I take off for 6 months and just hand you the keys to run the shop. What do you do? And that question freaked you out.
It did. Well, honestly, I was like, if this is what this guy, I was wondering, I was like, is this really the right position for me? Because if this is what this guy wants me to do, there's no way I'll be successful, right? But what did I say?
I don't remember. What did you say?
Really? Well, I guess I'm
you said
here,
a
so it
lot.
doesn't matter. Yeah, you do. I said I'd keep the boat steady, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I don't need to. Obviously, you were hiring me in a new position to do something, to make changes. But if this is where we were going to be, and I would just have to keep the boat steady. You don't need to change anything. It's been working fine. Mm-hmm. So anyway, also what he also did, Watkins asks that you should probably accelerate your learning. And so one of the practical ways that I did that when I first came on was, I had my notes. I took my notepad everywhere. I put anything that I had an idea in my top left, and any of my questions were in the top right. And they didn't go anywhere, but every once in a while I would go back to them and my notes, all the things that you were teaching me, where all the accounts were, the different entities and the different departments were all in the center. But then the why are we doing it this way is in the top right. And what does this even mean in the, top right? So dashboards should look like this in the top left. And so I think for anyone in their new positions, I'd definitely go first 90 days.
All right.
Books 7, 8, and 9.
Okay, I love how you group.
A trilogy.
Oh, I see here. The Jim Collins trilogy.
Yes, sir. And not really in the trilogy way that you would think, but I'm going to call him a trilogy because he probably never would. Built to Last, Good to Great, and Great by Choice. So as it turns out, Built to Last, it was published first, then Good to Great, and then Great by Choice.
And Collins even says himself he wouldn't read them in that order.
He wouldn't. So you've read them all, Mark.
I've read them all.
What do you think?
I think Good to Great has to be first in order. I would presume Great by Choice would be the middle one and Built to Last would be the end, but I'm not sure.
He says Good to Great, then Built to Last, then Great by Choice. But what did you think about the books?
So I thought all of the books were great. I've repeatedly quoted him, about, one of his concepts was take big risks, but make sure they're measured risks. In other words, fire bullets, not cannonballs. Take small risks that you can easily afford to lose, or you can back out of, or change course if you need to test it out. Just, test things out repeatedly, but make measured small tests until you find something that works. And then when you find something that works, blow it out, fire the cannonball at it. So I constantly quote that phrase and he repeats that, I think, throughout the trilogy, actually. I don't know, there's so many concepts in the book. I'm trying to think, I'm starting to blank a little bit. That was one of the biggest ones that I just keep going back to, because I do that all the time. I am constantly experimenting, particularly in the marketing side, in this, since this is a marketing podcast. I experiment all the time with marketing money, and I will blow, $5,000, $10,000 on some marketing test to see whether it gets any traction or not. And if it gets a little traction, we'll expand it out further. And if it just totally bites, and then we just, we cut it. And I will tell you that I have failed way more than I have succeeded. But when I do succeed, then I blow it out, and I succeed in a big way. So, I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned from Jim Collins. I'm sure there are others. If you would have warned me, I probably would have prepped a little bit for that.
I should have prepped you, Mark. So I will say, I didn't introduce the book. So Built to Last was published first, and it answers the question, what makes the truly exceptional companies different from the other companies? Then, of course, we've already talked about Good to Great in episode 5. So he did suggest that you actually read Good to Great, then Built to Last, even though they weren't published in that order. And then finally, Great by Choice, Uncertainty, Chaos, and Luck, Why Some Thrive Despite Them All.
Well, I think the basic premise of the Great by Choice, if I'm remembering this correctly, is that luck matters a lot, but successful companies capitalize on their luck.
Yes.
Whereas, mediocre companies or less than mediocre companies, fail to capitalize on the luck that presents their way.
Because they execute well.
Yes.
So these are books 7, 8, and 9. Again, I wouldn't say these are easy reads. They are tomes, to use my earlier word.
Would disagree slightly. I would put them in the middle.
Okay.
I read Good to Great a second time on a beach, and it wasn't that hard. They're certainly not as big as the Tim Ferris books, but yes, they are. It's not something you can sit down in 2 or 3 hours and knock out.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that you can definitely, he says one thing, and then you're like thinking about its application to your own business for a very long time.
Right. That may be the best way to do it, is read a chapter. How would this chapter apply to what I'm doing? Then read another chapter, same thing. How would this apply? And just take your notes that way.
Yeah. So
I will say my one criticism of his series of books, it's not a criticism, it's just what I would point out is a bit of a limitation, is since he's big into studying companies, and he even admits it, the only really companies that you can study are big publicly traded companies, because all their financials are public. To some extent, that sort of puts what he's talking about in a different realm than, say, it's a small business.
Well, into law firms.
Particularly in a law firm, in a service industry, like we do, because most of the big companies out there are not service companies, they're product companies. That doesn't mean there's not a million lessons to learn in that trilogy. It just means that sometimes you will struggle to identify with certain concepts and how that applies to a small business, particularly a service business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hear what you're saying. So in our next segment, we're going to do book 10 and maybe a bonus book if I'm allowed.
I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. And it's on your favorite topic, Mark.
Oh, God. Okay. I'm Marc Whitehead, a lawyer, entrepreneur, and business coach. Thanks so much for tuning into the Successful Barrister podcast. We have a blast creating it, and I hope you find it helpful. If our chats have sparked your interest, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email at mark@markwhitehead.com. That's Mark spelled with a C. Enjoying the Successful Barrister newsletter. Even better, let's hop on a call. I'd love to chat about how we can collaborate, share ideas, or just catch up.
And we're back with Mark's favorite topic.
You just love to do the intro coming back.
I don't know. It's a little powerful. I'm getting a little giddy with
She's smiling so big that she gets to do that. I just might make you do it all the time then.
No, I don't think that. Well, then it doesn't become my own thing. You're making me do something. So my last 2 books, which I say for the end because then you can't cut me off, are I would call more soft books on soft skills. So book 10, which I felt like had to make the top 10, Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, a fellow Houstonian. And she's written a lot, but I think my thesis...
My wife loves Brené Brown.
Yeah. My thesis is that the reason why they make this book made my top 10 is that to truly, I think, excel as either a leader or a law firm, I think the most marketable skill that we can have is the ability to be a better human. At some point with AI and also just at the level at which we are competing currently, we all have more or less the same skills, the same access to technology. We're all investing in the same type of marketing things. So what differentiates us from other law firms, or what makes me a better leader than the next person, is my ability to be a better human, the ability for our team to deliver better customer service than the next law firm. And in order to do that, you have to be a good human, which means that the thing that differentiates us from computers is our soft skills.
We are in the people business.
We are.
There's no doubt about that. We are in customer service, and the big differentiator in customer service is how you make people feel.
And that takes the ability to be a good human. And so that, can I leak, our next episode is going to be about EQ in depth. So I'll
You're leading that one too.
I'll try to give you more notice next time, Mark.
EQ as it relates to marketing your law firm.
I will say that you can't, as with my other books that just made you maybe have a better life and better just execution, you can't manage the cases that you're bringing in through marketing if you can't be a good human about it, because your clients are just going to go find the law firm that can. So in book 10, Dare to Lead, it's guidelines for how to, quote unquote, rumble in a healthy way. Did you read it yet, Mark?
So I started it. I will admit that I kind of lost interest because it is so touchy-feely. I did listen to her TED Talk, as you asked me to do, which I think is kind of a summary of the book, or at least
we're gonna call it
in that way. Again, my wife loves Brené Brown. I tend to judge a book on the to-dos that I write down from it. Mm-hmm. And this is not one of these types of books that you're going to come away with a lot of to-dos. It's more, I would call it a to-don't book. Don't do this, don't do that, don't be an asshole, don't be a jerk, be a nice person.
Yep. And I think sometimes people need more clear guidelines on that. And so I'm going to unsurprisingly disagree with you a little bit, because on pages 76 to 77 of the book, you guys...
Oh, I didn't get that far. That's why I didn't see it.
Oh, Mark. You're going to get to 76 to 77 is a list of to-dos, or actually to-don'ts, and then to-dos over here. So, for example, on the to-don'ts, propagating the false dichotomy of victim or Viking, crush or be crushed, is a to-don't. And then a to-do is practicing integration, strong back, soft front, wild heart. And so I think that it's very clear. This is our shortcut. Here's why I think this is important for our listeners. And I won't name any names. We're on a PILMA listserv. Did you see the one that came through yesterday? We had...
I don't think I have, no.
We had one of our PILMA members. So this is a listserv that goes out to all of the PILMA members. And he said that he had a paralegal resign over a unresolvable personality conflict.
Oh, I did see that.
And now he was struggling, looking for, is it going to be offshore help? Is it going to be someone, I mean, like this magical unicorn somewhere that needs to be helped, because the team couldn't get along. And I think that Dare to Lead, if everyone could buy into it, actually, and if everyone understood their portion of how they are doing the to-don'ts and how we can replace, because it's just as important to know what you're doing wrong, but giving you something that you can actually replace it with a better habit, hopefully creates a better team, creates better leaders. Because now, unfortunately, our fellow PILMA member is dealing with not the business of running a law firm, not marketing his firm, not customer service, how do I replace someone?
Yeah.
I mean,
interviewing 100 people. That's what he's doing.
Or even how? Where do I go? Do I offshore this? Do I keep it in-house? This isn't even, he's not even unfortunately dealing with the actual business of his law firm. And I think that that's where a lot of law firms will find themselves capping out at if you don't have a base understanding of EQ and if your team can't get on the same page, on the same EQ page.
So it's funny you mentioned habit when you were talking about the action items. The first one, don't be a Viking or a victor, or a victim rather. The first thing that popped in my head when you said habit was, that's sort of relates back to Stephen Covey's win-win habit. One of his 7 habits was win-win. It's not like you don't have to be a victor or a victim. How about everybody wins?
Absolutely. Create a situation where, and especially as leadership teams, we tend to do that as lawyers anyway, right? Like that is the essence of our job. Try and find a place where both the client wins and maybe opposing counsel is in our job, especially where we see them on the next side. Like you don't want to just hammer that, opposing counsel because...
The other habit of the 7 habits that rang to me by what you were reading was first seek to understand and then seek to be understood. That was another one of the 7 habits of Stephen Covey, which sort of fit in with the second one that you read there. It's amazing how this stuff comes full circle. There's only so many ways to skin a cat, but there's lots of ways to say it. And if you read enough books, everything starts to come full circle.
Are you saying you've read Dare to Lead now, Mark?
No, I will not go that far.
I will say that it's very easy to read do statements like, create win-win situations. The don't do this, you're like, it's a lot, it's easier to see, where am I in that? Do I do that? And I think that that's how this book is. And she's just done exceptional work.
Yes, she's a great writer. And she's a great orator. So
yes,
her TED Talks are great. And she does narrate her own books on Audible. So she does a great job on that. So they're very pleasant listens. I just, you know how I am. I sometimes wander.
That's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get my bonus book before you cut me off.
All right, bonus book.
Extreme Ownership, written by Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin. They were leaders of the SEAL Team 3's task unit Bruiser, and they take lessons learned from the heroism and tragedy of war and apply them to leadership. Read it?
I have read excerpts of it. I know what the book is. I think I've even listened to one of them speak live. They were a keynote at some event I was at. No, I haven't read the book.
So that's okay. It's a great, I think it's a great concept. One of the key takeaways that I had from the book, he says, human beings are generally not capable of managing more than 6 to 10 people, particularly when things go sideways and inevitable contingencies arise.
Oh, that is so true.
Yep. How many direct reports do you have now?
I have 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a handful. And fix it.
I think you like having that many people, or else you would have already fixed it. But I think that it's important. I wanted to make this one, I wanted to add this one to the list because I think it's important for growing scalable law firms. It's actually one of the rocks that I think that we gave one of our departments this year was to create a scalable hierarchy within their firm their department, because it's so big right now that it's too... Like you've got one person and then another person and then the rest of the team. And it's just like, that just isn't going to work. And especially as we try to grow to the department. So one of the things that we've tasked them with doing is creating what Willink would probably call as a decentralized command, so that we can scale that department. So it's one of those things then again, and great stories, just incredible stories. He's got a great podcast too. Mm-hmm. So.
All right. Well, Diana, thanks for this great marketing presentation on this marketing podcast that will forever be done about marketing going forward.
I don't think I had a single marketing book. I think and I didn't intentionally not do that. I just...
So how do we, that's always the big frustration.
Blue Ocean almost made it.
Yes,
I will say Blue Ocean almost made the list.
Almost, no. that could be a good one. It is funny how lawyers, now I know I've been goofing this whole time, but like for lawyers that always go back, how do you get your cases? How do you market? How do you get your cases? Every conversation goes back to that, and nobody can give you a really good answer, and whether they don't want to give you an answer or they just simply don't know. And I try to bring them back around. It's like, you don't necessarily need more cases if you just run the cases you have better.
Yeah, I didn't want to be the operations person in the room, but yep, exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be about that, although it's not, it's obviously it's what we all strive for. All right, Dinah, what are your closing thoughts here?
Read the books. Let me know what you think. If you agree or disagree, Diana at markwhitehead.com. Diana with one N.
With one N.
One N. Yeah, let me know what you think
Okay.
about my list and why it's better than Mark's.
Okay. Which means I have to come up with my list.
Yes.
Can I double up on some of yours? Or does it have to be a totally different list?
I don't know. We'll get into the terms. We'll negotiate terms.
We'll negotiate terms on this. It'll be I have to come up with a win-win. Come up with a win-win.
Yes.
Seek to be understood.
And all the other rules.
Yeah, all that good
of
stuff.
Healthy rumbling.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we're getting the high sign. It's time to get out of here. So I want to thank everybody for listening to the Successful Barrister podcast, where legal legends are made. I'm Mark.
And I'm Diana.
And together we're the dynamic duo of law. So remember to rate and review us wherever you get your podcast. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, tell your friends. Let's grow our listenership even more. Tell them about this great marketing podcast called The Successful Barrister at successfulbarrister.com. And be sure to visit our sponsor, Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability law firm, at disabilitydenials.com. And with that, we're out of here.
Bye.